Coming up, we take an in-depth look at the critically acclaimed new play Liberation, a vivid exploration of the ongoing struggle for women's equality from the turbulent 1970s to the present day.
This is what democracy looks like.
Then,
A streetcar named Desire.
Who do you think you are, a pair of queens? Just remember what Huey Long said, that every man's a king, and I'm the king around here.
we analyze anew the conflict between toxic masculinity and the kindness of strangers within the Tennessee Williams classic, now in a stirring revival at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, with Paul Mescal as Stanley Kowalski and Patsy Farron as Blanche Dubois. Welcome back to Theater All the Moving Parts. I'm Patrick Pacheco. Playwright Bess Wohl describes Liberation as a memory play. It follows the evolving landscape of women's liberation through two generations. At the heart of the play is Lizzie, a journalist who unearths her late mother's past as an unexpected revolutionary in the 1970s women's movement. Set in a rec center at a consciousness-raising group meeting, the play shifts between past and present as Lizzie, our narrator, pieces together the struggles, triumphs, and unfinished battles of the women who came before her. Joining us today are four of the powerhouse actors bringing this story to life. Betsy Adom as Margie, a housewife reckoning with decades of unpaid labor. Audrey Corsa as Dora, a young woman having an unexpected feminist awakening. Crystalline Lloyd as Celeste, an editor and intellectual determined to shape the feminist movement in her own way. And Susanna Flood as Lizzie, the woman trying to make sense of it all, and our narrator. Susanna, as the narrator, at the top of the play, you come out to the audience and you articulate very succinctly the stakes of the play. What are they?
Wow. The stakes of the play are that the gains that were made by second wave feminism and other attendant civil rights and social rights movements of the 70s feel like they hang in the balance at this moment, feel like they're in danger of being lost.
We are sisters. We are rebels.
Are we losing this? And if so, how do we get it back?
And you talk about your mother.
Yes.
Inspired by Bess Wohl's own mother,
Yes.
I believe.
Yeah.
And you talk about her as this dutiful woman who made your lunches, cooked every meal, did everything that the perfect, unquote, housewife could do in the 70s. And you ask the question.
I asked the question, I say this woman was actually a radical, and how is that possible? That in her youth, or in a moment before she had children, she was actually trying to create a consciousness-raising group with other women, and how could that be possible? That she sort of started out as one thing and then became the antithesis of that.
And then the play time travels to 1970 to small town Ohio, to a gymnasium where you
A rec center.
A rec center.
Yes,
Thank you
yes,
very much.
yes.
And in which you play a dual role. You
Yes.
then become Lizzie, you become the mother.
I do.
In her youth,
Yeah.
organizing these beautiful 6 women who answer your leaflet in the days of mimeograph machines.
That's right, yeah.
Why does Lizzie start this group?
Such a good question. It's not articulated by the play, except that she truly believes that consciousness raising can lead to meaningful social change that impacts the state of the world. So she says, we raise our consciousness, we change the world, which I think is the hypothesis that fueled the actual historical consciousness raising groups.
And the women answer that clarion call. Betsy, Margie answers it. She's well married for quite a long time, and she comes in as sort of the senior member of the group. Why does she answer that call? Why does she come into the rec center?
She's at a crossroads in her life where her sons are grown and her husband has retired, and she's home saying, is this it? I haven't even thought about realizing my infinite potential. And she sees this flyer at the grocery store, I'm assuming the same way that Celeste's character saw it. And she's thinking, there's something I could maybe grow into, because I've been in stasis for so long, like just doing a routinized set of tasks for a very, very long time.
And I decide to write a list, just a little list of the tasks that I do, that I have done for the last 45 years.
And I think that her awakening through the play, and any kind of awakening is not just our own solitary awakening, it's a group awakening. Each person has a collective experience of trying. And the part of the play that's funny is how we lose our footing doing that, because you have to lose your footing. Otherwise, how's the audience supposed to sympathize with you or empathize with you? Because it's always when somebody's tripped that everybody automatically goes like that.
Audrey, as Dora, you thought it was a sewing circle, right?
I thought it was a knitting circle.
Knitting circle.
Actually, yeah.
And
which-
so you chose to stay, and likewise, why did you choose to stay? And as you read through the script and looked at the character of Dora, was there something that grabbed you about her?
Yeah, well, I think the fact that Dora arrives at this group sort of by accident, and how this could feel like home to her, even though she feels completely out of her depth and totally childish compared to all of these women who, in some ways, taken control of their lives. So it was exciting to me to see she has a real transformation throughout the piece.
And was there a moment in the play that obviously involves Dora that you thought, oh, this is going to be fun to play?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah. There's a scene really early on where she sort of has a breakthrough that, it's interestingly enough like the first breakthrough of the group, where she sort of realizes that she is an equal human being and has every right to speak to that.
Well, you're talking about her job, obviously, as a secretary, sitting next to a deadbeat guy that gets promotion over her.
Neanderthal.
A Neanderthal. Yes, a Neanderthal who, named Ray, who everyone's got their Ray, whose work she does most of.
Right.
And for, no other reason than, the fact that he's a man, does he get the promotion? And she
I think
doesn't.
you put it a little bit more
A little bit more
specifically.
yeah, specifically, right? Yeah.
The only reason he gets a promotion is
because he has a penis.
That's
yeah.
right.
Just come to me because they don't want to deal with Ray. And he just kind of shrugs. Sorry, Dolly. Sorry, Dolly. And then I don't know, I guess my mind went blank because then I just said the only thing that Ray has that I don't is a penis. What? I know, I just said it. I really did. I said the only thing that Ray has that I don't is a penis.
Crystalline, Celeste is whip smart, comes in, has a gravity that she lends to the entire play. At least that's how I saw her. And likewise, why does she come into this group? And was there sort of a galvanizing moment for you as you were reading through it that made you think, I know who this woman is?
I think the first scene, I knew who she was. Within her first 3 lines that she says.
Would you describe them and say that?
She's like, shut up. Shut up. Let them speak. Let her speak.
Is she the one that says the line, a woman not being interrupted is much
We believe that a woman speaking uninterrupted is a radical act. And I completely identified with her in those first 3 lines. Just, I grew up in a predominantly white community, a predominantly conservative Christian white community, and
where was this?
This was in Texas. There's a lot of assimilation that happened in my youth. And so showing up to spaces where I was an other, I found myself more comfortable doing that than showing up to spaces where I had people who looked like me. So I imagine that Celeste showed up to this group at desperation. Because I think, we talk about how she comes from New York. I imagine she comes from a very eclectic group of people, but predominantly minority. And so for her to come back home to this very specific space and to decide to stay, because there are a couple moments I've mapped out for myself for Celeste where she gets ready to take her bag and go, and something stops her every time. And for her, it's the women sitting around her. And I think that she has a really beautiful duality to her, sort of like, I like to think of like President Obama. He's able to hold two things at once. And I think Celeste is able to do that until she's not.
You brought up something that I was going to ask about later, but I'll ask it now. And that is one of the beautiful things about these 6 women is the bonds of solidarity that are developed. I was reading some kind of article in which it was discussed that you actually had your own consciousness raising group among yourselves in real life, and that you volunteered at different times your own harrowing experiences with misogyny. And so I'd like you to share those harrowing.
Misogyny, oh my God. I mean, I came to New York in the 70s. I'm the only person in the cast that was like, you know, a teenager in 1970. So, you know, it was all over the place. I mean, there's so many incidences of being, you know, pushed up against a wall by your boss, or, you know, many things of even before our union had any rules or had those any anti-harassment policies, people grabbing you backstage. There was so much of that. And it forced me to think I can either, you know, capitulate, I can fight it, you know, what are my options? And I just thought, I can just stand up for myself. I never thought there was a place I had to go, that I could call or go. I had to negotiate it on my own, which in a way taught me good conflict resolution skills. Now, sometimes it created conflict because I bucked at things like that, but it also taught me to stand up for myself. Not everybody is comfortable with doing that.
Susanna, at one point, as the narrator, you say, my biggest nightmare was becoming my mother. And I'd like you four to talk about your mothers and talk about, if you will, if this resonated with you at all, or your mother held you in good stead to do what Betsy had the courage to do.
Oh, God. Oh, my God. I have a challenging relationship with my mom. And in fact, I haven't, my own mom and my relationship to my mom has not actually been a great, has not been something I've discussed much in the process, and is mostly an internal question that I am keeping with myself. But Betsy, as Lizzie, as the mother character, says, you know, maybe I should have shown you more of myself. Maybe that's always the case with mothers. And one thing that happens to me in that scene is that I do think about my own mom while I'm also thinking about my child. And my own mom, I think, showed me too much of herself, in fact. So I reserve a place in myself for some conflict about mothers that I'm sure I'll be sort of wrestling with for my whole life. But she was, you know, she does identify with the 70s, and she went to Washington and she burned her bra in a trash can.
Come on.
Yeah, she was around in this, and she identifies with this era for sure. And I think that's all I'll say.
You brought up, I thought, one of the most moving moments of the play. And that was simply that she says, and we should sort of explain that the narrator is trying to figure all these things out and wants to ask her mom, who is deceased, about the questions that plague her about her time in the 70s. And so Bess Wohl, the playwright, offers that opportunity by saying, you can ask her. And Margie, who's been playing Margie, or Betsy, who's been playing Margie, then plays the mother.
Yeah.
And it's so moving. And that line particularly is so moving. I didn't show you as much as I should have. And I think, certainly my parents, and I think we can all relate to that they were so busy being quote unquote perfect. They were so busy raising you and making you the star of your life that they felt, I can't talk about myself, my desires, my needs.
I don't know if that's everyone's.
Your mother was an actor, I believe,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
What was the most important lesson do you believe that came from your mother?
I think it's really this, she instilled in me a sense that I had a right to take up space, that I had a right to, and to be messy, and really to be, to be human, you know, and she did a great job of that, you know, and that you know, the world is tougher for women in many ways, you know.
Crystal and your mom?
Lily Pearl, that is my mother.
My
And-
mom's name is Lily too.
Get out! How do we
Sounds
not
like a
know
scene
that?
from the
I know,
play.
I know. Not so strange.
It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. You were saying. I grew up in a black house. That's what we do. And it is. My mother was untouched by feminism. Untouched. She never experienced anything in that way of independence. She grew up in her family's house as the oldest daughter, taking care of her siblings. And when she met my dad, that's when she moved out. And that was after college. So she spent college living with her parents, taking care of her siblings. So we are very different because that's what they offered me was choices and freedom. And I was the only girl and the youngest. And I came a lot further after my brothers. So I was also an only child. So I had a lot more freedom to kind of explore boundaries. And I was very good up until probably I got to out of college. I started asking a lot more questions of my upbringing and started taking a lot more risks. My mother's not a risk type of person. She's risk averse. So quitting acting and being a missionary like scared her to death when I did that. Moving to New York at 30 and like deciding to try a whole new path was like, what? So she is also one of my biggest supporters. I call her probably after every show because I evoke her as my mother in this. Like Celeste's relationship with my mother just echoes off of that page. And she's been my homie. Like, yeah, my mom's cool, but we're so different. So we do disagree on a lot of things. But even in that, she was very careful about revealing who she was as I got older. And that has a lot to do with just, you keep certain things to yourself. You know, she experienced some things growing up. She was like, you do not reveal these things to your children until they can reach an age where they can kind of comprehend it. So I will say she was great about that. Yeah.
Betsy, did you grow up with the idea that you had all the choices in the world?
Oh no,
That your mom?
no. I mean, the choice was that you went to college and that you got out of the state of Arizona to go to college. And but my parents were very leery and disapproving of my choice of profession in the early years, and they barely came to see me do things because I think they kept thinking I'd grow out of it, which I guess I didn't. You know, my relationship with my mom has really evolved over the years. She was a housewife. She raised 3 children. She took care of the books. She took my father's income and invested it. She could have run a company. Wow. She could have had a great profession. She's very, very bright, very well read, very cultured, knows more about art. But her provincial, and she thinks people in New York are provincial, which is so interesting. But you know, but she's provincial in her ethics and things like that, which is also good. But I think it's taken a long repair. And like Mother's Day, about a year ago, I wrote down 100 things that I'd learned from her, and I realized that list is very long.
I think what's present in the play is an anger that these women weren't able to fulfill their full potential. That is the source of a certain anger that is just beneath the surface in the play. It comes out in various ways. Margie wants to stab her husband, right?
Yeah, I mean, he just doesn't even regard her as worthy of much more than being basically his housekeeper. And the mother of his kids, but I don't think she gets that. She is not seen. And I think not being seen is an incredible frustration to anyone in a relationship. And either the relationship, erupts, or a person buries themselves, or they go to a rec center and suddenly, go through like you said, a transformation.
And Audrey, obviously your character explodes and comes in and is a little bit freaked out about it. And again, this solidarity of women calm you down.
Yeah.
Crystalline, how does Celeste handle the anger that appears to be brimming just below the surface?
I think you're seeing it throughout the show. You have little moments, whether it's with Isiodora, whether it's with Lizzie's character, where it comes out a bit. But that has a proclivity to scare people. And so when we do see it, it's in a way that it is at a completely appropriate time, and it is completely justified, and it is devastating, but it's something that you see needs to happen. And it can be a lot walking around with that, which is why, when we get to our dressing room, we're like, what's the music of the day? What are the good vibes? What are the tunes? But I think anger is a very powerful and necessary thing. I think it has the ability to, I think Maya Angelou said, it's like fire, like scour out what needs to be burned out. And so I think that's actually one of Celeste's most powerful things, is that she carries so much anger, but she knows how to control it.
It can be clarifying,
Yes.
anger. And as the only black woman in the group, Joanna, played by Kayla Davian, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, calls you on it, calls you, hey, you think these women are part of your group? It's us and them.
Yeah.
How does she take that?
She knows. She's not ignorant to the conversation that Black culture has with other people's independence and freedom, other people's activism and their revolutions that they get to have. And this is a controversial thing, but I've said this before. Black people are very nice, and they have been very nice. We are in a country that did not want us, and the fact that we haven't resorted to the things that we see other countries resort to in order to get their independence. I'm like, Black people are so nice. And, being the only, there is a responsibility to uphold the dignity and integrity of Black people when you're in a room as an only, and that is unfair.
I just wanted to add on
Please.
to what Crystalline said. I think in along with that anger is also this very beautiful compassion that you're judicious about who can take it. And she's very kind to Margie. I always feel that she doesn't go at me with the same kind of ferocity that she goes at other people. And I think that kind of brain that can read the room and scan and know who can take how much, is a really interesting dynamic in the character in the play. Yeah.
The top of the second act starts with an astonishing scene, which may or may not have caused trepidation when you came to it. Susanna, obviously, the women kind of keyed off by what was going on in the circles at the time, this magazine or whatever else, have a all nude session, and it's funny, it's moving, it's honest, brutally honest.
Yeah.
How was it to do it?
Well, I don't want to speak for anyone else's experience, but this scene did not cause me great fear. Mostly because I feel I've humiliated myself so completely over the course of my career on stage that the act of being naked doesn't cost me much. I feel I've embarrassed myself in deeper ways. You know what I mean? I'm not going to meet any of these. I'm probably not going to meet these people after the show. Their thoughts about me, I can't control, and it's more painful for me to imagine them thinking I'm a bad actor than it is for me to imagine them thinking that I don't look good without my clothes. I don't care. I really don't care about that. I've also had a child. You know what I mean? The gauntlet has been crossed. Like, it's not. I don't feel like I'm holding many cards close to my chest at this point in my career. So, but. I also remember that I saw this piece a very, very, very long time ago. We talked about it in rehearsal a little bit. I offered it as an anecdote to the cast for whatever that's worth, where it was a cast of like 6 women, and they came into the room. There's under fluorescent lighting. You know, it's the entire piece, maybe an hour long. They were completely naked, and it was one of the most exciting, funny, liberating experiences I've ever had as an audience member, because at first I was like, you know, these naked women come on stage and I'm like, I'm sweating because in the audience because I am so nervous. And then like a couple minutes go by and like I'm not seeing them that way. I'm not seeing it anymore. It's not a problem for me anymore. I'm just beholding the play itself. And so I knew that could be possible for our audiences. I was excited to give them that experience. I also think that it is cheeky and joyful to have a scene in which women are naked and they're not being sexualized, and their experience of discomfort or ambivalence, or they're enjoying or they're not, there's a range of opinions represented in the women on stage in that scene, is the social event of the play. It's not an act. We're not saying, hey, New York audience, look at these 6 naked actresses. What do you think about that? Can we do that? It's actually an event in the scene that the characters are experiencing. So to me, what that says is nudity is not a problem. This happened in the story. How proud women were to do this in the era.
We have to wrap up, but I really wanted to get to a couple of more points in this fascinating play. But Bess Wohl wrote this play in October, was developing the play in October, before the election. And she said, look, I know that however November 5th turns out, it's going to affect how we look at this play. And to be blunt, the predators are in charge.
Yeah.
This just brings a whole other contextual meaning to everybody that's sitting in that audience is listening to these issues. So how are you feeling about where women are after this nasty election with a black woman as the Democratic presidential candidate? And what we are now, the women's movement is now left with what's going on.
I want to say I did the first workshop of this play a year ago. I had the luxury really and like an inspiration of having this play throughout the whole election cycle to refer to, and it was a deeply inspiring. So I find, just to speak to the feelings of futility that and rage that come up, you know, in this absolutely bizarre time. Comfort in knowing that there are brilliant minds and beautiful, compassionate hearts that are still moving this goodness forward. You know, there are still women, there are still brilliant thinkers, human beings who are looking out for humanity.
Betsy, you've had a long arc of political developments and events.
Yeah, I mean, the loss of Roe is I take it personally. I find it incredibly upsetting because I had friends who got pregnant before Roe, who had to leave the state because it wasn't legal in the state that I grew up in, and then Roe came along, and there was a period where women got control over their bodies. To lose that again, I went on a 62 county search in the state of New York, counting up how many reproductive health care centers there were, how many high schools there were, how many children, young women, were going to be affected by the fact that they couldn't get reproductive health care. That keeps me up at night. And so to be talking about it again in the play, I just, I want to know what I can do. I don't want to just be sad or mad. I want to know what I can do.
Well, one thing we can do is say in this moment that J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump, all these, Steve Bannon, these people who are currently speaking about the experiences of women, they are liars and bad faith actors. So if anyone out there has some questions about how women feel, they should come see our show, because everybody here has rage.
Yeah.
Everybody has rage.
Crystalline, the play definitely encourages and sparks a lot of conversations. And after all the conversations and all the exchanges, what do you hope happens as a result of them?
I don't know. I got to be honest. I got my passport renewed. I have friends who have left the country and taken their families. You know, my experience has left me wary of radicalism, but I'm recognizing that's what we're fighting. And there's going to need to be a counteract to that. And I don't think it's going to be gentle. So I'm hoping that there can be at least some community that's built up in the midst of all of this, that people find their people.
Yes.
And that people, you know, we're going to need each other. And I think that's what's, you know, that's the scene with Celeste and Joanne is.
That's what Celeste says.
We actually need each other more than we think.
That's what Celeste says. She says, yes, if you're going to burn it down, then you've got to rebuild it.
You gotta-
You're only going to
Yeah.
rebuild it with community
And conscience.
Conscience.
So we're very grateful for this play, very grateful for you and your terrific, terrific ensemble of actors and this community that you've built among yourselves. So thank you very, very much for
Thank you for having
for
us.
Time, yeah.
coming
Yeah.
together with us
Happy
today.
to talk about the show.
Yeah. Thank you.
We're taking a short break. When we return,
Hey, Stella!
we'll dive into Tennessee Williams's A Streetcar Named Desire, a psychological drama that still captivates audiences after nearly 80 years. Stay with us. And we're back. I'm delighted to have Matt Koplik, host of the podcast Broadway Breakdown, and Dr. Annette Sadik, a distinguished professor of CUNY and author of multiple books about Tennessee Williams, including Tennessee Williams and the Theater of Excess, The Strange, the Crazed, the Queer. Welcome back, Matt, and welcome, Annette. We're so excited to have you because Streetcar is back, this time at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. A London import directed by Rebecca Frecknell and starring Paul Mescal of Gladiator II fame as Stanley Kowalski and Patsy Farron as Blanche. Both roles are arguably among the greatest in theatrical history. Blanche, a genteel Southern belle, desperate and destitute, arrives at the dreary French Quarter apartment of her sister Stella, which she shares with her husband Stanley, a brutish working-class stiff seething with sexual charisma. In little time, the two explosively square off against each other. The last Broadway revival of Streetcar was in 2012, and so I thought it's a good opportunity to look at Streetcar Named Desire in light of the fact that it is arriving in New York at a time when the Stanley Kowalskis of the world are ascendant politically, if not at the bully pulpit. So I'd like to start our conversation by asking you, why after 80 years since it opened on Broadway in 1947, directed by Elia Kazan and starring Marlon Brando as Stanley Kowalski and Jessica Tandy as Blanche, why since then has it so become a part of our American DNA? Matt.
Well, I think that, not to sound basic here, but I do think that the movie very much helped in that respect in a way that a lot of movies do it. Yes, with Marlon Brando and Vivien Leigh. Movies just are more widespread, they're more widely seen than a stage play ever are, and thus Marlon Brando as Stanley Kowalski became synonymous with the method acting and became a whole new style of performance that has now sort of defined cinema today. On top of that, I think the poetry and sexuality and the raw animalistic instincts of a lot of Tennessee Williams' works, which I think is at its prime example in Streetcar, are just things that American playwrights are always trying to come back to. And audiences are, I would argue, like kind of always a little hungry for, even if they say otherwise. And it's also just objectively, I think, a good play. And it keeps coming back and we find new layers to it, and we keep sort of finding the roots of Americana, American theater, right back to it.
Annette.
Yeah. I think it's also very much about the complicated nature of desire, which never goes out of style. And I teach this play at least once a year. And students who are college age now always find it relevant. They don't find it dated. Because it's not the kind of play, and it would be a bad play if it was like this, if it were like this, that says, okay, villain and victim. It's this complicated dance. And so students will often look at that and say, well, where is he coming from? Where is she coming from? And Stella's position especially, she kind of likes that Stanley is brutish. She says when they got married, they came into the house and he smashed all the light bulbs with her slipper, and Blanche says, what, you didn't run, you didn't scream? She says, well, I was sort of thrilled by it.
Well, I think the fact that he wants to go there, that Tennessee Williams goes there, is very brave. Certainly was brave in 1947 and continues to be brave. I mean, reams and reams of ink has been spilled over cultural commentators talking about the respective virtues and flaws of each of the characters. And Tennessee Williams was famous for having saying in the play, everybody is right. Everybody has their point of view.
Stanley does do an unforgivable act at the end of the play, and he's rightfully called a predator in that respect. People often forget, and there was a piece about Blanche in this respect. Blanche is also, by today's standards, a predator. She was a teacher who had an affair with one of her students. What makes her so fascinating is she is learned, and she is articulate, and she is fanciful, but she also has an arrested development. She disassociates, whereas I would argue Stanley very much lives in the real world, in the now, but he is not as learned, and there is her judgment of him, but then there's also just the fact that she comes in with $10 words, and as we've seen in this country time and time again, it doesn't take much to make a heterosexual white man tick and break. And she really just has to do that to really get to him. But she does push him even further, which gives the play drama and it gives it tension.
What's fascinating about the original production is that the audiences in 1947 took Stanley's side, interestingly enough. And in fact, there was a lot of laughter leading up to, and then the shock of the rape. And that led a lot of critics to think that Tennessee Williams had stacked the deck against Blanche.
You can see Blanche's pain when she says, caught in a trap in that last scene before he does rape her. And Williams has a lot of compassion for that. And so when she's destroyed at the end, I don't think he takes Stanley's side at all. But he also doesn't want to lecture or preach about good and bad. He wants to show how misunderstanding led to this moment. And it's Stanley's play in the end. The last line is not, I've always depended on the kindness of strangers. As some people misremember, it's the game is 7-card stud.
Yes,
right? Everything, and the original title for the play was The Poker Night.
And the interesting thing about it is that Stanley has about a third of the lines that Blanche has in the play. That's just how powerfully written Stanley is. Matt, in terms of the productions that have subsequently come up since 1947, the challenge for the actress playing Blanche has always been to balance the resilience and the strengths that she must show for to be an equal fight or worthy opponent to Stanley, but also the vulnerability, the flutteriness. In your opinion, who's best handled that in the productions that come down the pike?
My personal favorite is still Vivien Leigh, who I think has a good sense of that balance.
Deliberate cruelty is not forgivable. It is the one unforgivable thing in my opinion, and the one thing of which I have never been guilty.
My least favorite, and I hate to say this because I like her as an actress, is Jessica Lange, who I think, when I watched her, leans too far into the wounded butterfly.
Those cathedral bells? They're the only clean thing in the quarter.
And Margaret, who I actually did enjoy a lot, didn't really have enough of the woundedness, but did have a lot of the resilience.
Some things are not forgivable. Deliberate cruelty is not forgivable.
Her Blanche was sassy, and her Blanche went up against Stanley.
Played by
Treat Williams.
Treat Williams.
Yes. With Beverly D'Angelo, I believe, as her Stella. And so what I think I like about Vivien Leigh is that you get the sense of someone when she enters the screen. And from all accounts of what I've read of Cate Blanchett's performance, it was something similar, of when this Blanche arrives, she has survived until this point, but she is running on 2% battery, and she needs everything she can get to, get herself back up. And ultimately, the tragedy of the play is that for every time she does, get some resilience and some strength, something happens, or she does something that brings her down a couple of pegs until she finally just is on the floor and raped and completely broken.
What's fascinating, Annette, is that obviously Vivien Leigh was a British actress. Cate Blanchett is Australian. And the Cate Blanchett production was directed by Liv Ullmann, a Norwegian actress and director. Do you think that having that distance, and now Rebecca Fresnel, a British director, is now going to be the director for the Brooklyn Academy of Music production, with a British actress in the lead. Do you think that having this distance of being a foreigner to an American play works in its favor?
Not necessarily, but I don't think it's a negative or a positive, because I've seen some great actresses who are American play Blanche, and I've seen some great actresses who are not American play Blanche. Jessica Tandy, obviously I didn't see that one. Hope it's obvious. But I have heard recordings and read about it, and she was, I think, from what I've heard, perfect in terms of that balance. That's in that scene where she tells Stanley, no, it was the Tarantula Arms. That was the name of the hotel when she fights back. You see that tiger. Vivien Leigh, obviously she won the Oscar, and she's this iconic performance. But Liv Ullmann's production with Cate Blanchett did something I had not seen before. They changed the script a little bit. They made it Blanche's play at the end. She's all disheveled, and there's a spotlight on her as the doctor goes away. But the rape scene was different. And it was really the first time that I understood how Stanley went from 0 to 60. Because he's joking with her, he wants to bury the loving cup, everything's fine, and then all of a sudden he's predatory and telling her you won't be so bad to interfere with.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but a lot of critics say that Blanche provokes him in that.
She provokes, she's obviously right, provoking him, calling him, pearls before swine and all that. But it didn't feel like enough to me ever when I saw it. They were so drunk in this production, and so visibly, playfully drunk, that when she provokes him, it's easy for him to snap. And during the rape scene, there's a blackout, and then this I've never seen. I mean, Liv Ullmann did this. The lights go up. Stanley is naked, lying on his stomach. He's fine. He just did whatever he did, and now he's sleeping. Blanche is on the side of the bed, sitting with a scarf around her, shaking, and she's done. And then they lowered the lights. It's not in the script, but it served the play. And I thought that was a really great moment.
And who was her Stanley, do you recall?
It was Joel Edgerton. It's interesting to me that Cate Blanchett ended up doing Blue Jasmine pretty soon after.
Which is Streetcar.
It's so Streetcar, but it's the only real insight I have into her performance as Blanche. But you watch her in Blue Jasmine, and it is, in addition to just being so much Streetcar coded, you watch her have that fight, not just to survive, but for her sanity. She's always on the brink of falling into some kind of mental state, and you watch her dangerously teeter in and out, and I think that makes it such a fascinating Blanche. It makes her just almost as animalistic as any Stanley you could see. And I would love to see a Blanche like that.
And that was 2013, I think, that film.
Something like that.
And it was very much about how the situation for women hasn't gotten that much better in a lot of ways.
Getting back to the Cate Blanchett production, I wanted to ask you, Annette, did you feel that the sympathy of the audience was toward Blanche in that production?
Yes. I think that leaned a little more towards sympathy for Blanche. When I saw the 1992 production with Alec Baldwin and Jessica Lange, it leaned much more towards Stanley. And Alec Baldwin was playing it as this, you know, very almost innocent, you know, he really tried, and what else could he do kind of character. So it's very dependent on the director and the concept that they have.
Do you think because the director was a woman,
Perhaps.
that may have influenced it? What's fascinating about critics, and the New York Times critics in particular, is that in the original 1947 review, Bruce Atkinson raves and raves about Jessica Tandy as Blanche, and then just sort of dismisses Marlon Brando in a paragraph with all the others later on at the very end of the review. In 1992, Frank Rich, reviewing the production, raps rhapsodically about Alec Baldwin and then kind of dismisses Jessica Lange. In rereading Frank's review, I was struck that it almost reads like an apologia for Stanley. Did you get that impression?
Yeah. And I think that production was leaning very much towards apologizing for Stanley or understanding Stanley. And I think it's very hard to have that balance. And I think if you don't have that perfect balance, it can be a bit just not quite right.
Yeah.
But it's hard.
I did not get to see the 1992 production, only the TV movie that they made. But up until that point, and he talks about this in the review as well, of the shadow of Brando on that role and of Streetcar in general. And I think up until then we had, I think it was Anthony Quinn opposite Uta Hagen, Aidan Quinn did it opposite Blythe Danner.
Right.
Two Quinns.
Right.
But men who just could not measure up to Brando's performance, could not get outside of the shadow. And I think people sometimes confuse the attraction they have to Brando and to what he did in that role for what the character is or what the character is trying to do, which I think is tied to what Williams is trying to do, which is the things that people will look past, that they will forgive in the name of not just lust, but genuinely desire. I desire this man.
Mm-hmm. Was the problem with John C. Reilly being cast
and Natasha
as
Natasha
Stanley? Opposite Natasha Richardson.
Yes, and Amy Ryan as Stella. The John C. Reilly, but I remember when that came out, and it was a very controversial take because he did not look like a Marlon Brando or a 1992 Alec Baldwin, and people asked, well, must Stanley be a hunk? And it's like, well, he does have to have a magnetism about him because you have to give a reason for Stella to want to stay with him all the time through everything he does, of the dynamic between him and Blanche. And it doesn't have to be beauty so much as there's got to be an energy. And from everything I read about Reilly was that he did not channel that energy.
Annette, apart from a good bicep and the energy that Matt was just referring to, what else is necessary to measure up to Stanley?
I think Matt hit on the key points, that theater is very much about bodies on stage. You know, it is visual. And I saw the John C. Reilly production. I've seen all the productions, and they all had something to add in their own way. But there does need to be this aggressive masculinity, this dominant masculinity that has to come across as sexy, not too overbearing, just sexy. And even Brando had a kind of androgynous masculinity, right? So I think that's key. And with Natasha Richardson, as you mentioned, she's very much a presence, and she was also a large, tall woman. And so they didn't seem quite matched because John C. Reilly was playing it a little bit more, not sweet, but not quite as aggressive. I thought it was an interesting choice. The interesting thing about Brando is that he's become this iconic Stanley, right? You think of every actor who plays Stanley has to do Brando, or has to come up against Brando. But he never won. He didn't win a Tony. And in the Oscars, they all won awards, the other three cast members, and he didn't win. He lost to Humphrey Bogart, African Queen.
Well, because Humphrey Bogart was such a more likable character.
There you go.
Kazan, who directed obviously the original production of Streetcar, what appealed to him about actors was the feminine in the actors that he worked with, Montgomery Clift, but he mentioned that about Marlon Brando as well. Do you think that part of that archetype of Stanley needs to be vulnerable in some way? Because I was kind of astonished by Rich's review in which he says that Stanley is heartbreaking when he's screaming Stella after beating up his pregnant wife.
You know, that's so interesting because there is a vulnerability to Brando. And in the movie, what I talk about a lot with my students because they've noted this. When Brando was, you know, in his torn up t-shirt, soaking wet, screaming for Stella, Kim Hunter's face as she's coming down the stairs, she is not a victim. She has power. And she's looking at him like, yeah, get on your knees and beg for me. So it's not that simple. And, you know, I think that dance is very important to get right. Lee Brewer, who did a production of Streetcar at the Comédie Française in 2011, he had cast several Stanleys. I mean, this is one of the best things I've ever seen. When Blanche was being raped, there were like 5 or 6 Stanleys around her with green wigs and makeup because he said his archetype for Stanley was Heath Ledger in The Joker. And he saw that as a kind of androgynous figure, and he very much felt that both Brando and Heath Ledger in The Joker had that complicated sexuality. So it's not just about this aggressive masculinity, there's something else going on there.
Yeah, so you watch Brando the movie and there are times when he has a limp wrist or he sits in ways that maybe aren't overly domineering. And it's I think that goes back to the energy we were talking about of Stanley will assert power when he feels like it's being threatened, but when he's just in the moment, it is an I don't care and this is me, take me as I am. And I think it's that kind of confidence and that casualness that a lot of people gravitate towards all the time of, oh, you must know something or have something that I don't, so I'm gonna come to you. And as you're saying with Kim Hunter in the movie, I love that shot of her at the top of the stairs when Brando is basically like a little boy screaming for his mommy in that moment. And when she comes down to him, it is the like, yeah, get on your knees. It also, it's power and it's control, and he likes it. And then they kind of wrestle with that power as they go into bed together. And you just sort of see how it's not that he's a villain and it's not that he's a victim. It's just that he has facets like everyone does. And his, like in any Williams play, are just like very powerful facets. It's not like, they're all at an 11 out of 10. It's not like he's got this one little nuance. There are many shades to Stanley. They're just all very big shades.
So here we are in 2025, and obviously words like, phrases like toxic masculinity are tossed around. There doesn't seem to be room for tender feelings, as Blanche puts it. Where do we find ourselves with Streetcar Named Desire now within this milieu, where on one hand you do have toxic masculinity in positions of power, and a women's liberation movement that seems somewhat mystified right now?
I think there's always room for this play to adjust to the current moment. So people are going to interpret that play according to how they see things and according to the current moment and do with it what they will. So I think there's room for that. I've seen productions, not Broadway productions, where directors have basically told me she wasn't raped. It was a seduction. And while I don't see that at all, there's apparently room for that as well. You know, I think people will just do with it what they will.
Blame the victim.
It's a complicated play.
I think people are always in want of answers. Very simple, easy to understand answers. And the best theater doesn't provide them. They provide questions and they provide prompts. And humanity doesn't even really have answers. Every time we think we've come to one, some wrench is thrown and you look at the overall scope of humanity. It's a constant cycle and it's a constant wibbly wobbly. And I think Streetcar, because it doesn't necessarily judge and because it gives every character a virtue and a flaw. And again, as we were saying, the theater of excess, it's Williams, so it's the most extreme of those things. People will come to it and in certain moments of their lives, for moments of turmoil in the world, and look at it with a very specific and I think not rightful simplistic lens. And I don't think there's room for interpretation, and there's room to do productions where you need to have a viewpoint in order to make your production succeed. But there are a lot of times when I get very frustrated when I hear people say like, this is exactly what it is, and there's no other answer.
It's not a political treatise. It's not some kind of moral map. It's a play.
Yeah.
And he's trying, as you've been saying, he's trying to show the complexity of life and desire and human beings, which is what good plays should do. Otherwise, you're doing the same thing as the, Hays Code and the Hollywood producers who are saying, no, this has to be the moral at the end.
Yeah.
Same thing.
It's not moralistic, but I believe that, like all of Williams' work, it is moral.
Yes.
That one of the most moving things about John Lahr's biography of Tennessee Williams was that Williams, especially later in life, was always trying to get back to the goodness, is how he put it. And in a way that seems to me key to Blanche in a way.
Yes.
Blanche is always trying to get back to the goodness, in her soul in many ways. And it is a work of the spirit and a work of the soul.
I think that's something to keep in mind, this goodness, the spirituality, but also the connection with the physical.
And so the beat goes on with A Streetcar Named Desire, and I couldn't thank both of you enough for joining us for this provocative discussion, but how could it possibly be otherwise? So thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And thank you for joining us. We look forward to bringing you more fascinating conversations with creative artists who live only to astonish us. Be sure to download the new CUNY TV app to watch all our shows, also available on YouTube. I'm Patrick Pacheco.